Today, by popular request, we are out here taking a look at the all-new 2017 Audi Q7. Audi has long preferred the one sausage in multiple different lengths school of design. They also prefer design evolution to design revolution. And that's why even though this Q7 is completely new for 2017, it looks very much like every other Audi product out there. Looking a little bit more closely, however, you will see some details that are very different than before. We have these more aggressive headlamps and a slightly different grille. It's a little bit more angular than it was in the past. At just under 200 inches long, the Q7 is one of the larger entries in this segment. This is a few inches longer than a BMW X5 or a Volvo XC90. The big difference in the overall side profile between this and the Volvo is really right up here. We have a longer hood than we find in the XC90. That is important because it's just the way that the drivetrain is oriented under the hood that Audi needs this long hood up front. It actually means that we get a little bit smaller of a space inside than you do find in that Volvo. Out back, the Q7 is largely reminiscent of the previous generation model. However, we do get all of those latest Audi styling cues with new tail lamp modules with these T-shaped LED light pipes inside. And of course, they separate the rear fog lamp and the backup light into this separate module below. In terms of front seat comfort, the Q7 scores very well in this segment. I think these seats are a little bit more comfortable in base form than the base seats that we find in the X5. And I think in the top end form, which is the 18-way power seat, they're a little bit more comfortable than the top end seat in the X5 as well. However, they're not quite as comfortable as the comparable Volvo seat in the XC90, although we do get a power tilt telescopic steering column, not a manual steering column in the Q7. It's also memory linked with the buttons right over here on the door. Back here in the second row, the Q7 really leads this segment. I have an exceptional amount of legroom sitting right here behind myself. I'm 6 feet tall and I have about 7 inches left here. I also have a decent amount of headroom, even though we also have the panoramic sunroof in this vehicle. Improving cargo practicality, the Q7 has a 40-20-40 folding rear seat back in the second row. And they're completely independent of one another, so you don't have to fold this outboard seat in order to fold this center seat. Now, I didn't find the third row of the Q7 quite as comfortable as the brand new XC90. The seat bottom cushions seem to be a little bit closer to the floor. I don't have quite as much legroom as I did have in the XC90. However, as I said, this is one of the larger three-row crossovers out there, and this is still something that I could do at 6 feet tall for, say, 30-45 minutes without a problem at all. When it comes to cargo capacity, you'll find just under 15 cubic feet of space behind the third row seats. That's with them up right here in this position. And you won't find any more storage space under the load floor. That's because we do have a subwoofer down here. You'll also find the can of Fix-A-Flat and the tire inflator down there as well. It's because we don't have a spare tire in the Q7. The interior design sort of reminds me of the old Audi 5000 from several decades ago, with this large bank of air vents that runs right across the dashboard. The Q7 gets Audi's latest version of MMI, and so we have this large screen right up here on the dashboard. It is a wide format screen, and you'll notice that we do have Apple CarPlay integration and Android Auto in this version. Although it's not a touchscreen, you do have to use the control dial in order to navigate around this interface. In addition to the Audi MMI system right over here on the dashboard, we also have this LCD instrument cluster over here on the left side of your screen. This is very similar to what we see in the current generation Audi TT. Because the Q7, when you equip it with this display, still maintains the central MMI display, we don't see quite the same array of options and features inside this display as we see in the Audi TT. The steering wheel design is a 4-spoke design with this large split spoke right down here at the bottom, but you can put a few fingers through there if you prefer. We have sport grips right up top, but you won't find sport grips lower on the steering wheel. You'll notice a few things about the Q7 right away behind the wheel. The first thing is we have the optional 4-corner steering, and that actually turns the rear wheels. That means we can actually make a U-turn out here on this winding mountain road, and you couldn't do that in a wide variety of even smaller 3-row crossovers. That makes the Q7 an awful lot easier to live with in urban situations where you have to parallel park or you have to deal with very tight parking lots. The other thing you'll notice about the Q7 is that this has lost a considerable amount of weight for 2017. The previous Q7 reminded me an awful lot of the Buick Enclave, because the Buick Enclave is quite heavy for its category, so was the Q7. Now, even though we have lost a considerable amount of weight, this Q7 is still a few hundred pounds heavier than the Volvo XC90, which is probably its toughest competitor. And that curb weight does affect the Q7 when it comes to handling, because the Q7 actually handles a little bit worse than that brand new XC90, even though this does have a strong rear wheel bias. A lot of that difference actually is noticeable on these winding mountain roads because the Q7 has more weight up front than we find in the XC90. Volvo's brand new platform design and 4-cylinder only drivetrain means that they've been able to shift an awful lot of the weight to the rear. When it comes to acceleration, however, the Q7 still wins with its Audi Quattro system and a ZF 8-speed automatic transmission. We ran from 0 to 60 in 6.1 seconds, which ties with the Acura MDX, beats the Volvo by about 0.2 of a second, and actually beat the BMW X5 by about 0.4 of a second in our tests. Of course, at the moment, BMW does have a twin-turbo V8 version of the X5, and we don't have one from Audi yet, although I do expect to see one soon. To compensate for the Q7's curb weight and its weight balance, Audi has shoed this car with very wide tires. We have 285 width tires up front, 285 width tires in the back, and these are summer tires. That allowed the Q7 to stop from 60 to 0 in 125 feet, which is an incredibly short stopping distance that is notably shorter than the lighter XC90 or MDX. However, when it comes to absolute grip, Audi was just not able to hide the weight balance and the overall curb weight of the Q7, and this doesn't feel quite as connected or quite as engaging as the Volvo or the Acura out on these roads. In addition to the four-wheel steering, our model also has the optional adaptive air suspension, and this is one of the better air suspensions in the business. This suspension does have a decent amount of variation between comfort and dynamic mode, which is something that we don't see in every air ride suspension out there. Although the Q7 has lost a decent amount of weight for 2017, the fuel economy has not improved as much as I would have liked. We've been averaging just over 19 miles per gallon over a week of very mixed driving in this vehicle, and that is a few miles per gallon less than you'll get in the XC90 or the MDX. Audi decided to start the pricing on the Q7 at $54,800, and that base model does come as a 3-row crossover with LED headlamps and a sunroof. It is actually quite well equipped for the luxury segment. Now, $54,800 is notably higher than the Acura, the Infiniti, or the Volvo. However, we get more feature content in the base Q7 than you find in those base competitors. In addition, the Q7 does start as a 3-row crossover, and for instance, the BMW X5 and the Volvo XC90 do not start as 3-row crossovers. They actually start as 2-row crossovers. Then you have to actually bump up some trim levels in order to get the 3rd row in the back. The BMW X5 starts just $100 less than the Q7, but you get considerably less content in that vehicle. You do get the 3-liter turbocharged 6-cylinder engine, but you don't get the 3rd row, you don't get the LED headlamps, etc. In addition, the X5 manages to actually be slower than the Q7 in our tests. When it comes to driving dynamics, the X5 wins over the Q7. The Q7 definitely feels large even in this version, even though it has lost a considerable amount of weight over the last generation model. This weighs nearly 5,000 pounds, and even though Audi has stuck quite wide tires on it, it's difficult for the car to hide its weight. And since a large portion of that weight is actually sitting right up here on the front axle, it tends to feel a little bit more front heavy than the X5 especially. Mercedes doesn't really have a direct competitor to the Audi Q7 at this time. They have the GLE and they have the all-new GLS. These are basically the artists formerly known as the ML and the GL. The GLE 350 starts at $51,100. However, it's a decent amount slower than the Q7. It also doesn't have a 3rd row. Mercedes hasn't announced pricing for their brand new GLS, which is replacing the GL, but you can expect it to start between $65,000 and $68,000 starting, and going on up to about $130,000 if you fully load it and get those AMG versions. You'll expect to pay about $5,000 to $10,000 more than the Q7 for about the same feature set. With everything tallied up, the Q7 and the XC90 are my 2 top picks in this segment, and I have to say it was very, very difficult to choose between the 2. I really like some aspects of the Q7 and I really like some aspects of the XC90. The drivetrain in this vehicle I like actually a little bit more than the XC90. I just like the way ZF's 8-speed automatic transmission shifts. They both have very, very similar feature sets. Volvo's new Sensus system seems to be a little bit more practical. It's not quite as sexy as this particular system, but it actually takes up less dashboard space. So the overall interior design of the Q7, although very, very attractive, very luxurious, is just a little bit busier than the XC90, and I do like the more simple design going on in that Volvo. Audi and Volvo have very different approaches to performance these days. Audi is continuing with their classic Quattro all-wheel drive system, which is again integrated into a ZF 8-speed automatic transmission, rear-wheel drive power bias in this particular vehicle, although a strong front weight bias. They have very similar performance numbers. They both have 8-speed automatic transmissions, although this particular vehicle is about 0.2 of a second faster to 60. Now, Volvo gets there with a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine under the hood producing 316 horsepower. This one, of course, has that 3-liter supercharged 6-cylinder producing 333. Because the Q7 is heavier than the Volvo, there is not a huge performance difference between the two, even though we have a slightly more advantageous transmission in this particular vehicle and of course that extra power out of it. Because of the Volvo's slightly lower price tag, slightly better handling feel, and I think slightly more attractive exterior look than the Q7, I am going to give it the top pick in this segment, but you can't go wrong by picking the Q7. And I would take the Q7 over the Mercedes-Benz GLS because this is a much better value. I would also take this over the Acura MDX. I think it's worth paying the extra amount. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes. Be sure and click that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen, and I'll see you next week.